Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time TV discussion program in English explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm. And I'm Natalia Humenyuk. And now we have the start of the new season at Hromadske International and the start of the new political season in Ukraine right after the new year. And at this program now we're discussing the latest and the most interesting issues which had happened this week. And for the last couple of weeks after the new year, Ukraine is discussing the new candidate for the presidency. And that is the person who is probably not that much known in the West, but is one of the most famous persons in Ukraine, a comedian, Vladimir Zileanskiy, who had been a celebrity, an actor, a comic for the last 20 years, a successful businessman and producer. There were a lot of jokes about him running possibly running, but that had happened. And I have the great panel to discuss that. We have Ivan Verstyuk, who is a journalist from the weekly Novaya Vremya and had recently written a big piece on Vladimir Zileanskiy. Inna Barzila, our colleague CEO at NGO Center UA, which is running the watchdog civil society campaign during the elections, and Oleg Sukhov, who is the political reporter and a journalist at Kyiv Post. So welcome to the studio. But before we start, I probably would like our team to show a piece of video of Vladimir Zileanskiy, because that is a very special campaign, especially since he is running the satire show series which are called Servant of the People. So actually this is a pretty schizophrenic, because this is the theatric campaign already running, and this show he is playing a simple Ukrainian teacher who had become a Ukrainian president after a viral video showed him ranting against government corruption in Ukraine. So for the last couple of years he had been present at the Ukrainian TV screens as a possible president.
Вам слово, господин президент.
Да. Честно говоря, меня поражает ваше безразличие и цинизм. В тот момент, когда наша страна находится за чертой бедности, вы с легкостью перекрываете центр только для того, чтобы с ветерком промчаться на своих шикарных автомобилях, на стоимость каждой из которых можно сделать операцию какому-нибудь пенсионеру.
According to one of the polls, Ihor Kolomoisky Democratic Initiatives Foundation, Zileanskiy currently is third after Yulia Tymoshenko and Poroshenko. There are way more polls where sometimes he is even higher, is ranked even higher, but we can't also confirm all the, how credible all those polls are. But Ivan, what are the most important to know? Because is he a possible candidate?
I think Volodymyr Zileanskiy has good chances for winning the election, and I don't think we should consider him as a technical candidate who is acting to take away votes from one of other figures like Poroshenko or Tymoshenko. He is a candidate who aims to win the elections. But I don't think he is an independent, because since 2012 he's been employed by a television channel owned by Ihor Kolomoisky, who is a well-known Ukrainian oligarch. So I'm sure that Zileanskiy's campaign is controlled and is influenced by Kolomoisky and his interests.
We would definitely discuss the media resources Zileanskiy has access as a celebrity. And Inna, are you taking seriously his candidacy, especially now when the ratings show that he is indeed a popular person in Ukraine?
I disagree that he is a real candidate for presidency. I think that he is a real candidate for parliamentary elections, and probably if he will continue his political career, the future party, which is actually, it's already registered, yes, this servant of the people, will be present in the next parliament. But we should take into account why I'm not taking him seriously. His supporters are mostly youth, and youth is not reliable voter. So if on Sunday, March 31st, there will be bad weather, youth will not come to the district and will not vote for him. And another second important factor that Volodymyr Zelensky exists only on TV, and while his relations with Kolomoisky, the owner of 1+1 TV channel, are good, he will be like, I don't know, a media person in Ukraine. But when we are talking about the real campaign, there should be a real network of regional party offices. And Yulia Tymoshenko and Poroshenko are the leaders covering all the Ukraine with their supporters and with real offices who will control the election campaign, who will help to agitate, and who will later try to defend the results of the voting.
Kyiv Post was writing about the political situation in Ukraine, and I think what you would say for the Western audience in particular. I think that after the polls, a lot of talks were that Yulia Tymoshenko has good chances. The Western audience was hoping for Slavko Vakarchuk, another rock star. Now we have a pop star running, and they are not very much concerned, or like they don't know much about this figure.
So I think Zileanskiy actually spoiled this picture that, I mean, for Poroshenko and for Tymoshenko, because initially there was this duo of leaders, so Tymoshenko and Poroshenko, and Zileanskiy basically broke this paradigm. And now there is like a clear triumvirate, a trio of candidates who are likely to win. So Tymoshenko, Poroshenko, and Zileanskiy. I also agree that he's a real candidate, and he has a chance to win because he has the support of one of the biggest channels, 1+1. And it's actually, as far as I remember, it's probably the most popular channel in Ukraine, even despite the lack of regional party structures. I think like having such a big TV audience is a big upside. He's also seen as a candidate who's running against the political system, and that also appeals to a lot of people, appeals to the electorate. So because he's never been a politician, and basically a lot of people are sick and tired of all politicians. And he can use that frustration and mobilize it. And I don't think his only electorate is youth, because there's a lot of people who are older but who are also frustrated with the old political system.
And Ivan, you were talking to a lot of people about Zileanskiy, the people from the production business, film industry, and also the political environment. Still, can you explain his phenomenon? Because I think that just to treat him as a satire person, it's just too superficial, because he had been popular for 20 years. And he's been just not on one channel, but more or less a person who had been popular in Donetsk and in Lviv, in Odessa and elsewhere. Because it's very mainstream. It's not just about, like, for instance, this show is the second popular overall in the country, not like Slavko Vakarchuk being popular among civil society. And his views are kind of, let's say, anti-corruption, but if you speak about the language and other issues, let's say there is nothing radical there. It's more or less a person who unites Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers. He doesn't go to Russia any longer, but he's known around the post-Soviet space. Yes.
Zileanskiy is quite a talented comic actor, whose key secret of becoming popular was political humor, right? He wasn't joking about a lifestyle or relationships between people. He's always been joking about politics. That made him hugely popular. And he was always able to make deals with owners of television channels. First, he worked for Inter TV channel, and had a deal with Valery Kharashkovsky, former deputy prime minister, and then he made a deal with Kolomoisky for 1+1 TV channel. Besides, Zileanskiy launched his own movie production. He's been very successful as a businessman. His movies are among the most popular in Ukraine, and he is also hosting shows around the country. But what I want to say that besides that some of his views are populistic, there is some sort of pro-Russian sentiment, because if you go back to 2016, when Zileanskiy took part in a hugely popular Russian show staged in Latvia, in Jūrmala, he joked from the stage and he compared Ukraine to a prostitute who would go to bed with anyone who pays for it. And the joke was really popular among Russians. So I think he also appeals to people who have some sort of pro-Russian views too.
And I would just maybe add on that, because it was interesting. Now you're kind of following the series and you don't know whether the series or was it the political campaign where he have this popular appeal that, you know, like we're speaking about the language issue, but the language issue in Ukraine, it's when the politicians are lying. Let's sort out this issue. And my question would be, you're following, you know, civil society had been very critical to current political elite. And in fact, a lot of things Zileanskiy says is actually something which is echo, which what civil society says.
It is, but I consider his impact, the impact of this political humor, as a negative, actually, because for years, for 20 years, he was helping to channel the protest mood into irony. So it helped people like to joke, to feel relaxed about the mess in Ukrainian politics without any further real action. I mean, no petitions, no street actions, no real control of politicians. They just know, everybody know who are corrupted, who are bastards in Ukrainian politics, thanks to Zileanskiy. But he never appealed to people and never proposed any call to action. That wasn't his role, because he's a comedian, I understand. But it created Ukrainian political culture the way we have it now. So I think in general, I consider this as a negative factor, even if some of the cases he was showing in the shows are real cases. And civil society role, of course, is not only to make something public, but also to control the implementation of reforms, to control the procedure of, I don't know, law enforcement and so on. This is not his role, it's obvious.
Like Kyiv Post and your articles in particular are really critical regarding the corruption in Ukraine. You're doing a lot about that. So that's why Zileanskiy playing. So how do you see this? You know, is it helpful? And as well, how do you see this as well, despite he's a real candidate, still the independence, his independence from the oligarchs?
Well, I think Zileanskiy, well, theoretically he could break with this, you know, kleptocratic system, but it's not clear. I mean, it's he might do that, but he might also be very dependent on Kolomoisky, who is also one of the biggest oligarchs and one of the pillars of this kleptocracy. So it's basically with the two other candidates, Tymoshenko and Poroshenko, it's pretty clear what they stand for, because they've been you know, pillars of this corrupt system for many years. They're old politicians, you know, who started their political career in the 90s. So with Zileanskiy, he might be similar to them, or he might be completely different. So only time will show whether his you know, anti-corruption credentials are honest. As far as his like political you know, program is concerned, it's also not entirely clear to me. But again, if you consider these three options, I mean, from the standpoint of average people who are so sick and tired of all corrupt politicians, at least with Zileanskiy, they think they have a chance. With the two other people, they don't have a chance of changing the system. And that's part of Zileanskiy's appeal. And I'm talking about these three candidates because most of the other candidates, all the other candidates, they're either running very weak campaigns or are not running any campaigns at all.
Ivan, so really it's about the first there would be the first round, the second round, so still people thinking like, oh, if there would be Poroshenko and Zileanskiy, who would be the one? But if he is running against Yulia Tymoshenko, so is it exactly the same? Because she also has her appeal to the, let's say, public with the populist sentiment.
That's true. According to the polls, Zileanskiy could beat both Poroshenko and Tymoshenko in the second round of the elections. And he's very good at adjusting to the current political situation. We know that Zileanskiy has very popular social media accounts with like millions of subscribers. And he currently comments, for instance, on Instagram, he currently comments everything what's going on. And gets like 100,000 of likes. Yulia Tymoshenko's social media accounts are not that popular. Same with Poroshenko, though he also pays lots of attention to working with social media. What does this mean? When you work with social media, you want to gain more audience, younger audience, more active audience. And besides, since there are at least 20% of people who hasn't yet decided who they're going to vote for, Zileanskiy is also focusing on them to get as much of those 20% of the population as possible.
Guys, but to like on Facebook doesn't mean to vote for a person. It's only about informational campaign, and there are already investigations that first couple of thousand of supporters of Zeleensky page was for paid. So this is not a natural audience, not the natural readers of his social network accounts. He engaged paying money for this supporters. So it's not pretty much open and transparent and honest campaign. This is very technological, and the way he tries now to draft his program. So he asked Ukrainians to send him 5 problems which they think are the most important, and then he will provide like answers in his program. What is it? How we can assess this factor as the lack of his own agenda, or as a very technological instrument or a tool of citizens' engagement into politics? So he's pretty much like a new face in Ukrainian politics with new way of campaigning in the trend of European politics like Macron and so on. But we will not, we can't be sure how Ukrainians will react on such campaign.
And we still really don't know what are Zileanskiy's views.
Absolutely.
There are only a couple of sources that we can judge. First is his TV series Servant of the People, and the second, his rare interviews for the media. We don't know what he believes in economics. We're not sure if he knows how to run the economy, right? We don't know what he thinks about, say, judicial reform. We don't know his precise steps to do the anti-corruption reform.
We don't know his potential team. We don't know his potential political team. What are his supporters, not supporters, but what is his core team members? Who will be the potential Minister of Defense, or who will be the potential Minister of Foreign Policy, which he actually propose and nominate these people?
I should probably say something. A lot of politicians globally were running populist social media campaign within the last years. This is not something new, which is definitely new that nobody globally had the full TV series on the being a president, which are also, at Netflix, anywhere people can watch them globally. In this regard, should the Western partners be afraid, or you can think that an independent person, a politician and a businessman like Zileanskiy would be more pragmatic?
Who knows, actually. First step is to introduce to him, and I don't know, maybe to organize several of foreign meetings abroad for him with officials from IMF, for example. Let's start from IMF.
Well, I think one should keep in mind that the politician during the campaign and while staying in office, those very often are two very different politicians. Being popular with political jokes is one thing, and running the country is totally another thing. I wouldn't be that much afraid of Zileanskiy opposing to some IMF policies or opposing to some pro-Western direction in foreign policy. I would be much more I consider much more risk to be his connection to oligarchs, to Kolomoisky, because Kolomoisky probably wants from Zileanskiy to reach some deal on Privatbank, for example, and on other assets that are under arrest by High Court in London. So, and when a politician is not independent in his decision-making, that's the biggest risk for the country, because whole country becomes a hostage of politicians' sponsor.
Well, I think this, well, obviously that's not necessarily an indicator of what will happen in reality with the IMF. So I don't think the IMF should be afraid of that. And even if he doesn't take money from the IMF, why should the IMF be worried about it? But it's just like a common man's kind of conception of, you know, foreign lenders, foreign financial institutions. On the other hand, you could see even some rational aspect in that speech, apart from the populist aspect, because you know, there are countries that borrow a lot of money and then embezzle this money, and these loans, you know, foreign loans, never lead to anything. Like a lot of countries in Africa do that, and obviously there is a similar pattern in Ukraine when, you know, the conditions of IMF loans are not actually fulfilled, and when it's not clear whether this money is actually used for something. So I mean, you can see why this appeals to a lot of people, and whether or not you know, this will create some problems with, you know, foreign investors, I don't know, but let's see.
I'm just curious because it's exactly the perfect trick for Zileanskiy, because he can always say that, look, it was a serious. I never promised that. You understood me wrong, because in his real interview he says like, okay, there is IMF, there is a necessity to take this money, we would take them and we would negotiate. All these kind of usual things, and I think that would be really interesting, because the final season of the show would come in March. Just prior to the presidential election. But how we discuss which is also a bit of strange thing in the end, like that it would be a very unique campaign. But what impact it has to the other politicians? Do you think, how we can today describe the political campaigns of Poroshenko and Tymoshenko and maybe others? Because after the receiving the Tomos and the whole issue of the getting the independence for the Ukrainian autocephaly church, the Ukrainian president has his tour around the country, and his popularity is definitely growing. Yulia Tymoshenko started way too low with her campaign, and now she was kind of on the top, and now she's going down in the polls. What should we say?
I think there are very clear lines between Poroshenko and Tymoshenko and their voters. Poroshenko makes a bet on people's patriotism and their nationalist sentiments, while Tymoshenko focuses on low economic indicators of Ukraine, which leads to lower quality of life. So to put it simple, poor people want to vote for Tymoshenko, and people driven by nationalistic and patriotic emotions want to vote for Poroshenko, while everyone else considers other candidates.
Oleg?
So I think you know, Poroshenko is targeting people who are kind of afraid, who want stability. He targets an electorate which is very similar to Putin's electorate in Russia, like the electorate that you know, focuses on so-called patriotism, because patriotism can be, this word can be used in different senses, and in this sense. This patriotism is used to justify everything else, like to justify a lack of progress in anti-corruption efforts and reforms. So, like the war justifies everything, and his pre-election, you know, slogan, faith, army, language, it sums up this agenda. It's basically these issues, which are pretty easy to manipulate. They are used to offset and offset everything else. Offset, you know, a lack of economic growth. Offset a lack of progress in terms of corruption. Tymoshenko is using another strategy. She's appealing to anti-government, voters who are, like the protest electorate, and she's appealing to more impoverished people who are probably less concerned with religion, army, and similar issues, and are more focused on their economic conditions. That's why she's targeting economic tariffs. She's targeting all this populist agenda with and Zileanskiy's electorate. It's in some ways it's similar to Tymoshenko's, but he could also take away voters from Poroshenko, because he's seen as a candidate who's against both of them. Because both of them, both Poroshenko and Tymoshenko, are old politicians. So, and both Tymoshenko and Poroshenko, I think, should be worried about Zileanskiy, because he could deprive both of them of their place in the second round of the election.
I should even say that we had the reasons to believe that President Poroshenko is now encouraging Slava Vakarchuk to run, just to have to spoil Zileanskiy campaign, which we don't know if it would happen. Most probably now it looks like there won't be any more a new candidate. But Inna, your campaign, it's a professional, let's say professional civil society watchdog campaign on trying to make Ukrainian politics responsible and professional. What are you going to do with what's happening currently? How you try? What are your demands to the politicians, and how you're going to, influence the whole process?
Sure. The Chesna civil movement, we monitor election campaigns, politicians and party since 2011, so we have a good experience, and our main point of course is monitoring of politicians, their financial integrity during this election campaign, and their programs. And what we see now, we see a very creative technological campaigns, but the huge lack of smart programs. Please, when you visit the website of Central Electoral Commission, download these programs. For today, we have 5 officially registered candidates, and their programs are so empty. One of them more looks like some of them looks like essay. Some of them are like poems. Another just the list of empty promises without any economical reasoning or implementation plan. We would like to see, and we will appeal, and we will ask politicians to propose us smart programs according to the main powers of President. It's international policy, it's defense policy, it's, I don't know, the guarantee of rights and freedoms of Ukrainian citizens. First of all, to answer these questions. And later we will compare their programs, and will share and spread this information with Ukrainians to help them to make a rational choice rather than only emotional.
How about the open pro-Russian candidates, or let's say the people from the parties like opposition bloc? There were, if we were speaking half a year ago, there was always discussion. Would it be, for instance, the Poroshenko against somebody from former allies of Viktor Yanukovych? And now it doesn't look like. They are very low. There are numbers of them. They have their own channels. They have a lot of money. They are active.
Yes, they are, but for all those politicians from the pro-Russian spectrum of Ukrainian politics, presidential elections is a chance to get rating for parliamentary elections, which are going to take place in October. They are testing different campaign techniques, they are testing their voters, They want to feel what's really popular among pro-Russian voters, what works with them, and what doesn't work. And the one important thing, it's a clear lack of unity among pro-Russian politicians, right? We know Boyko wants to run, we know Vilkul wants to run, both are pro-Russian politicians.
That's kind of a split between Akhmetov and Firtash groups.
That's true. That's a split between the sponsors of those politicians. So they're not able to reach a compromise on anything, and they are clearly are political investments of Akhmetov, Firtash, and Medvedchuk.
I think no open pro-Russian candidate can win this time. Actually, this is no open pro-Russian, but you should be very attentive to their rhetorics and their programs and their real acts, because they can position themselves as being patriotic, but in fact.
Well, I also agree that there's no chance an open pro-Russian candidate will win, but Poroshenko actually is very interested in making one of them, go to the second round, because in the second round Poroshenko wants to run against a pro-Russian candidate, and he wants to show that he's like a patriot, and his competitor is basically the Kremlin. So that's why Poroshenko's Primy channel, which is linked to Poroshenko, is heavily promoting Boyko, an openly pro-Russian candidate, which is kind of ironic given that they claim to be patriots and they're promoting Boyko all the time. And two other channels, 112 and News One, they were recently acquired by Medvedchuk, Putin's right-hand man in Ukraine, these channels surprisingly also, especially 112, promote Poroshenko. So there is some kind of link, because pro-Russian politicians and Poroshenko are interested in promoting each other as two sides of the same coin in some sense, because they want to mobilize their own electorate, and they want to basically they want to promote their competitor as the epitome of evil. For Poroshenko, it's pro-Russian forces. For pro-Russian candidates, it's pro-Ukrainian forces. So there is some link there.
And by the way, talking about Zileanskiy, according to the polls, he takes the votes from Boyko. So this is the positive moment, because mostly the electorate in the eastern and southern and central part of Ukraine, who would consider Boyko as a potential candidate after Zileanskiy announced about running election, they switched, they chose.
By the way, in December, prior to Zileanskiy's announcement of his campaign, Poroshenko asked him for a conversation. He invited him to his office. We don't know for sure what they talked about, but I assume that Poroshenko first wanted to know Zileanskiy's plans, and then he probably made a suggestion that if you do throw trash on me, I will throw trash on you too, and that will be hard. So I think Poroshenko just asked for, as long as it's possible, to have a clean campaign without too much political dirt.
But to finalize that, what you just mentioned, it's indeed, I think, for the particular Western audience, interesting to mention that, yes, of course, Zileanskiy is a populist, but it's exactly, he's playing this economic populism. But he is trying to be rather neutral on all the identity issues, because he's coming from Central Eastern Ukraine, he's a Russian speaker, so all those issues which maybe won't be support the electorate which doesn't support Poroshenko and supported Boyko, really would welcome that. In this regards, he sounds even reasonable. He's clearly against Russia, but he speaks about a different kind of the Ukrainian identity, not too religious, not too conservative, no taboo on the television, there should be fair news, we can, no prohibition of all of the things, so which could have find some appeal at the Ukrainian society, which is rather pluralistic. So thanks a lot for the discussion. I think it's just a start. We can debate about it for the next 2 months, and we will do so. That was Ivan Verstyuk, who is a journalist from Novaya Vremya, a popular weekly and has just written an article on Vladimir Zileanskiy. Inna Barzila, who is the CEO of NGO Center UA and running the watchdog campaign Chesno, Fair during the elections, and Oleg Sukhov, a political correspondent of the English-speaking weekly Kyiv Post. Thanks a lot, and I'd remind that you can find all the versions of full versions of our reports and interviews at Hromadske International webpage en.hromadske.ua, as well on our social network on Twitter and Facebook, Hromadske International. Search that, and we are there 24/7 for you, and see you.